Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Hey, here we are into August. I'm celebrating the 9th anniversary of starting the podcast, and I really appreciate anybody who connects up with me on LinkedIn and shares the podcast with a friend, share some content that I share on LinkedIn. That would be really appreciated. Also, I told you last week, the thing about starting a podcast 9 years ago was that there weren't that many hosting companies, and the one I picked is doing okay, but not as good as the other one. So I have a mirrored podcast of this. It's called The Brutal Truth. The artwork is slightly different. The wording, the lettering is completely horizontal instead of at a 45-degree angle. So if you're looking to connect up with the new podcast with a great hosting company, please subscribe to that. It's much more reliable. I've had some complaints that some episodes were not available at all times. Also, if you're still on the old one that has the maverickmethod.com in the bottom right-hand corner, make sure you download all the episodes that you want because they have a max on my disk space that I'm exceeding right now. So every time I put up a new episode, I got to get rid of an old one. So make sure you're downloading those so that you have them. They're all free. Today, we're going to be talking about a really kind of interesting topic and something that I'm kind of digging into now, kind of embracing your imperfections. Why? Because you have control over them, because you can get better at them, and almost leading. Todd, my guest today, is going to be talking about leading with your imperfections. What it does is it makes the client trust you, because what we often do is try and handle objections, try and prove that we are the best in the world and there's nothing wrong with us, that we do everything that everybody could ever want, and that doesn't come across believable. So he's going to be using facts and research that he's done. He's a career sales guy and marketing guy, and really interesting. I got to warn you, he has a bird, and we started to get into the interview, and it was going so well that I didn't want to stop. And hey, can you get rid of the bird? So I'm warning you, there is some bird chirping in the background, and that's part of the downside of interviewing people that aren't used to being interviewed, is that you have to deal with a little bit of technical difficulties and bird difficulties at time. So please just bear with it, because there is good content here, and I think you'll like it. Also, make sure you're checking out nudge.ai and pipedrive.com. They've given a free month of using the product with the coupon code Brutal Truth. On my website, B2B Revenue, there's a free course on how I use Nudge. All you need is the coupon code NUDGE in there. Just remember that nudge. Hit me up. I've got an article on my LinkedIn profile. So, Brutal Truth, all one word, no spaces, to get a free month of pipedrive.com and nudge.ai. Between those two tools, I'm cruising this year. This year's going to be the best year ever. Things are going well. Unemployment, everybody, come on. There's nothing in the way. Can everybody get back from vacation, though? Everyone's on vacation, driving me crazy. I should take some time off. But let's get into the interview with Todd. At the end, I'll sum up and give you an update on the courses. Things are cooking. Office hours are going well. And what's really happening is people are getting the results that they wanted. And this is really rewarding for me, because there's so noisy out there today, and salespeople are really hurting. Also, make sure you're checking me out on Instagram, Brian G. Burns on Instagram, and Brian Burns on YouTube. I'm putting out videos, little snippets, 1-2 minute ideas that I have when I'm walking around. Let's get into the interview with Todd. Make sure you listen to the end. I'll also update you on a contest that I'm having here in the month of August to celebrate 9 years of spreading the brutal truth. Hey, Todd, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's great to be on. So I am doing something crazy, doing kind of a bucket list thing, which is I'm in the process right now of writing a book called The Transparency Sale that will be out soon here in the fall. But I've spent most of my career in sales and sales leadership. I'd spent the last 3.5 years as the chief revenue officer of Chicago-based Power Reviews. And then before that, I was with Exact Target, which is the company that Salesforce bought for $2.7 billion. So I was on the leadership team there to help with the IPO and the eventual exit. And then before that, various sales and sales leadership positions. And then at one time, I owned and operated a sales training company. So wow. I've always been a geek for sales methodology and the kind of the philosophy of learning. And that's kind of led me to where I am today, which is taking the leap into this whole book publishing process.
How's it going so far?
Writing the book, it was so much fun, just getting up every morning and just going pounding through it.
Yeah.
And as you may recall from your book, back a few years ago, the editing process is similar to having a root canal. It's pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah. How many times can you look at that same chapter with fresh eyes, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the editor, when you write a book, the book is around, it's between 45 and 50,000 words. The editor in her first pass, there was 1,300 red lines.
Yeah.
And it's not like period and comma. It's, hey, this line's confusing, move this. It's amazing. 95% of her edits are incredibly helpful and eye-opening. And she led with a Ernest Hemingway quote. Ernest Hemingway is quoted as saying that the first draft of anything is crap. He used a different word than crap, but
we can guess.
If Hemingway says that, then if I know I'm in no company like that, but it's been really interesting and eye-opening to go through this process.
And what was the inspiration for the book?
Well, I've always wanted to write a book. Having owned and operated a sales training company years ago, I just felt like I think differently about selling and the philosophy of selling. And I always wanted to do it. So one thing they tell you is if you're going to write a book, the first thing you should do is write a proposal, whether or not you're going to sell it to a publisher or not. And about 2.5 years ago, I came up with a concept. I wrote a proposal. And at the end of it, I was like, no one's going to want to read this. This is boring. So I put that aside. And then, as the chief revenue officer of Power Reviews, what Power Reviews does is they help retailers and brands. So like, retailers like Crocs and Vineyard Vines, and then brands like Excedrin.com collect and display ratings and reviews on their website. And so we had done a study that showed that a product on a website that has a review score sells best when the review score is between a 4.2 and a 4.5, meaning a product with a 4.2 will sell better than a product with a 5.
Yeah.
And I thought, all right, why is that? And then I started digging into the kind of the neuroscience around decision making, and it all kind of came together as, you know what, Brian, we teach salespeople to sell as though we're perfect.
Yeah.
So leading as though your product is a perfect 5, and selling that imperfection actually helps the brain feel confident in a decision. And then, there was so much more that I dug into behind that, that I started going down this path of, wait a second, we're teaching our reps to sell as though we're perfect, but we need to stop doing that. We're teaching reps to sell based on logic. So like case studies and data, but people actually make decisions using the feeling center in their brain. And then the last piece that really jumped out at me was that we focus so much on getting a potential buyer to come to one decision, which is to buy from us, when actually they're making almost literally thousands of micro subconscious decisions during the process that we're not thinking about when we're sending emails and putting together PowerPoint slides and even in negotiation. So that's where it all kind of came together. And I was like, I think that this is a different, interesting take. I put together the proposal and I like it. I had a few publishers interested. I selected one and off I go. And
you chose the word transparent. What was that, or the motivation for that?
Well, transparent is about, it's funny. If you remember the supermodel Tyra Banks, she calls it being flawsome, which is, embracing your imperfections and knowing that you're awesome anyway.
Yeah.
And so transparent is, one aspect of transparency is leading with your flaws. So here's the concept. When you think about the Challenger sale that, came around in 2011, the reason that came out was because buyers no longer needed salespeople for the things they used to need them for, which was pretty much everything. They could get it on their own. So, a challenger sales rep would need to come in and challenge their preconceived research and thinking about their own problems. Well, here we are today, 2018, where now you can actually find out why you suck. Your products and services, feedback is everywhere, and it's so easy to get at. And so I started messing around with this concept of transparency, where I would go into a client, and instead of leading with why we're awesome, I would lead with maybe some differentiator that our competitor has that many customers like that isn't even on our roadmap. And starting with that, not only does it disarm the buyer in terms of them being kind of resistant to a salesperson, but it makes it really hard on the competitors if that differentiator doesn't matter. The old axiom, you want to lose fast if you're going to lose. It helps you lose really fast. It helps you work on the deals that you should be working on. And so that's the kind of the transparency concept is, how do we lead with our flaws, disarm and sell as though we're a 4.2 to a 4.5 instead of pretending like we're perfect.
Does it require you lead with it as opposed to just be a little bit more sincere and straightforward and because they're going to know the flaws. I mean, with all the review sites and a few questions, and salespeople tend to, try and handle that as an objection instead of agreeing with people and explaining the priorities.
Well, I'll tell you, when I've started messing around with it, because before I got to this whole book idea, as a CRO, I'm not the lead guy on sales opportunities. Power reviews, I had about 60 to 65 people on my team at any time. But there was one instance where a head of e-commerce in New York called my rep in Chicago here and said, "Hey, we want to meet with somebody." And it's a prominent apparel brand. "We want to meet with somebody in the next couple of weeks. Can you come up?" He knew I happened to be in New York that day, my rep. And so my rep suggested to the guy, "Hey, can my CRO come in and grab coffee with you?" And he said, "Sure, that would be awesome." So I go into their offices. This VP of e-commerce packs about 8 people into his office and says, "Todd, I'm looking at your competitor. They've already been in here. What they do is impressive." And he had kind of a New York aggressive, like, let's just get to it type of demeanor.
Really?
He's like, tell me why you're better than them. And I was like, "Look, you just packed 8 people into an office. Maybe we can save a little time if I just start with why they're better." And the guy looked at me. He's like, "Well, yeah, sure, go ahead." And so our competitor had developed a ancillary technology that kind of bolts on that some of their customers really like. It was not even on our roadmap. It was not really focused on what we're great at. And so I laid it out for him and his team and said, "If this is really important, we've got some paths that we can help you with it. But I just wanted to make that aware right now because we might be able to save each other a lot of time." The whole mood in the room just completely deflated. And they were like, "That's hilarious." When they presented that solution, we thought it was strange, actually. It doesn't fit into what we care about. So let's dig in. And the reason why I say that leading with it is, our brains are actually resistant to being sold to. And anything that you can do to disarm that kind of that limbic midbrain feeling that somebody is being unduly influenced, the earlier you do it in the sales process and in your positioning, the better the rest of what you present will land in their brains. So I'm a proponent of doing it as early as possible.
Now, it sounded to me more like reverse psychology. Is that your view on it, or do you see a distinction?
I see a distinction in that, this concept of selling and leading with your flaws led me to this whole exploration. In writing the book, I don't write in the framework of talking about sales at all. From like sales literature. I've read 19 books on neuroscience to bring it together and figure out, like, why does this happen? And so it's really, most of it has to do with how the brain functions, how the brain makes decisions, how the brain engages with people when it's looking to make a decision that is, medium or high consideration, meaning, It's not like office supplies or staples. If you're making a purchase of equipment or technology that's vital to your business, there's a certain way that your brain checks the boxes internally that gets to a confident decision. And this approach helps to disarm the blockers that go in place right from the beginning in any situation where a buyer could potentially be influenced.
Now, I can certainly see how in an active sales process, this would be very engaging, very disarming. How about in a cold, latent sales process, meaning that they don't know who you are, they're not even in market?
Yeah, I mean, that's where some of the other brain science comes in. So when my book called The Transparency Sale, I really refer to the transparency sale as being all of the things that engage the buyer's brain and lead them to a confident decision. And so prospecting is a little bit different in that leading with transparency doesn't help as much. You don't send an email and go, "Hey, this is why we suck." That certainly wouldn't work. But I work the readers through some things to think about in prospecting that'll help with the disarming of the brain's resistance to influence. Like one being, when I was on the sales leadership team at ExactTarget, what the company does is helps major companies with their email outreach strategies. And they have technology that enables it. So like Gap, all the promo emails you receive from, the Gap and Banana Republic and all those, they come through ExactTarget's engine. We had always taught customers how to optimize the subject line because your subject line is what makes the difference between whether they're going to open it or not. But, today, first of all, the subject line, all of our brains are again, wired to be resistant of being sold to. Yeah. The second that it feels like an influencing message, a lot of times, executives are just going to look over it or delete it. But in all of our email user interfaces now, so I know Gmail, Outlook, my iPhone, they also show you the preview of the first few words of your emails. And, there's an opportunity to optimize that too. So not just the subject line, but we've got to start thinking about the first 10 words of our emails. And most of the ones that I got as a CRO start with, the word I. Like, I was wondering if I can get 15 minutes with you, or I was wondering why you haven't replied to my last 3 messages. Do you not like, all that kind of stuff? Yeah. And by the way, when somebody writes me an email that says, I've sent you 3 messages, you haven't replied, I always view that as like, thanks for the reminder as to why I didn't open the other. So it's, when you incorporate all those types of things, knowing that the brain is resistant to being influenced, I think we could use prospecting as an opportunity to add value in a customized way, like a personalized way, and think less about the cold email as a pitch and more about how do I develop a relationship and add value to this person's life in a unique, customized way.
Yeah. Now, let's dig into this. Now, what do people want to hear at these different stages? Is there a particular process that you have outlined, or is it totally contextual?
Well, it is. If you think about the sales process as being about the buying journey, and what do buyers do? Well, they first have to decide whether they want to change what they're doing today, and then once they do that, they need to change. Decide whether they want to do it with you, and then when they decide whether they want to do it with you, they need to decide, well, should I do it now? There are elements that fit into each one of those things. So we talked about the prospecting, we talked about the initial presenting or the positioning. There's also pieces around how you present that are very disarming. So, normal presentation, you come in and you make it all about yourself and you just show up and throw up. But thinking about it, I've got a kind of a cheesy analogy, but I discovered it because I do like reality TV makeover shows. And funny enough, they all use a really compelling choreography that's all about the subject or the participant. They come in, the participant or subject is typically a willing participant. They know they've got something wrong, but the show does an incredible job of saying, hey, you know what? Your knowledge of your status quo, it's actually worse than you thought. And they do it in such a way that subject or participant is all in. Like they're like, yeah, let's go. And you can actually create a presentation choreography that's very similar in the way that you present to a customer who probably realizes they have a problem. They invited you in, where you can challenge them to a certain extent to show them that what they're doing today is maybe worse than they thought it was going to be. And then you use the disarming, you use transparency as a part of it. But you end up creating a great story that's really compelling for your audience or your listener.
And do you do it about them, or do you do it with somebody else? Not with somebody else, but about somebody else as an example, like a case study? Or
no, you make it 100% about them.
Okay.
So, in most cases, you can go in and you understand why they brought you in. Obviously, they didn't just invite you off the street and go, okay, come in and present to us. And so, the choreography is really around, starting the conversation with just kind of understanding why you're there, and then going into a bit of disarming through transparency, and then having a conversation about, how do you teach them about the problems that they likely have that maybe they didn't realize. You back it up with data. You back it up with, the feeling, which is where the decision's really going to get made. And then only then is when you start to lay out, your role in this whole process. You lay out the journey for them.
But the missing piece I see is, how do you know that without digging in? How do you know what they're facing? How do you know the exact impact of it?
I see what you mean. Yeah. So there's a couple of ways. So if you're selling a product that's customer facing, it's really easy. For example, let's say you're selling, again, I was selling ratings and reviews, so I could actually go to a retailer's site and see what it looks like and how they're interacting. If you're selling any kind of distribution product, you could actually order from the company and see how the process works and start to learn about what the situations are. To your point, most of these companies, if you've worked with hundreds of companies and many of them are like this individual company, you can make the assumption pretty quickly that they're probably doing things that you can take the lessons learned from some of the other companies you worked and suggest that those might be issues that they're facing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was concerned about, because, having done this for years, if you try and make an assumption, you end up getting, oh, no, that's not how it works. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah. I mean, you typically want to go in, if you start the conversation about them and say, hey, listen, we understand why we're here.
Yeah.
There's 2 or 3 ideas that we had from understanding why you brought us in, but understanding the companies we've worked with and some of the challenges that they've faced. Can we share a couple of ideas with you? And there's not one company out there where we go no, I'd rather hear your sales pitch. Most of the time they want to go through those ideas. In my experience, when we've come in with 3 ideas, at least one of them has hit the mark in a big way. And maybe 2 of them are like, that's not as important, but that one, that's interesting.
No, I like that. That way you're not assuming, you're not kind of dictating, you're just sharing, throwing stuff up against the wall intelligently.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, to finish the answer about the sales process, one of the things that was really eye-opening for me a few years ago was the concept of what I call transparent negotiations. In that, we've always been taught to hold our cards close and treat a negotiation like we're in a Texas Hold'em tournament. And there's, I started messing around with this concept of, walking into a negotiation with my cards face up. And so, leading with, hey, here are the things that we care about. We care about how much you buy, how fast you pay, when you sign, and, if it's an environment where there's a commitment to be made, how long you commit. And then you've got percentages associated with each one, and you actually allow your customers to roll their own or negotiate their own deals. When we've rolled that out at some companies, the results have been amazing. But again, the demeanor of the negotiation does not force you to lose the trust momentum you had through the rest of the sales process too. And so it can apply to all kinds of things in the sales process.
Now, you brought up something that's been kind of my pet topic recently about focusing on the feelings, the emotions that drive it. And
Yes.
because we all talk, no one disagrees that people make decisions emotionally and justify them with logic. But nobody sells that way.
Right.
Everybody comes in with their ROI and all this logic, and everyone agrees the logic makes sense, but nobody does anything.
Yep.
Because it all makes sense to have life insurance and, catastrophe insurance and flood insurance.
Yep.
Right. But people don't buy it because it's like, I've never seen a flood.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you're always prioritizing. There's so much, so many things that I could talk about here. One of the things that's really interesting, first of all, I'm sure if you're not familiar with it or your audience, Antonio Damasio's work in Descartes' Error is super interesting stuff where he just talks about, some research studies around certain individuals that have lost their connection to their feeling center in their brain.
Yeah. And
because they can no longer feel, they can no longer make decisions. But the incredible study that I read was from Martin Lindstrom. He's got a book out, and the name is escaping me right now, but he talks about he brought in 2,000 people that are smokers into a study to see if cigarette warning labels work. And what he found is people were verbalizing the logic that, yeah, those cigarette warnings, man, they tell me that I really need to stop smoking. But then when they put them in the fMRI machine, which is the kind of the brain scanning machine, they would show them the cigarette warning labels. It would actually stimulate their craving centers and make the people want to go have a cigarette.
Well, that's it. And, you look at AA meetings, it's like you sit around talking about partying all night, and guess what people want to do after the meeting?
Exactly. Exactly. It's so, when we think about, and again, that's more associated with addiction, which is their brain's probably wired a little bit differently. But again, the way we verbalize logic and then make decisions with feeling, we can't always trust that a huge ROI or a really easy project or whatever is going to be the thing that pushes somebody over the line. We need to start using the words and painting the picture of what life is going to be like with rewards. Rewards are more effective feelings than potential pain avoidance. But that there's ways that you can do that in the words that you use. And, again, I think as salespeople, we need to start getting better at painting the picture for what life is going to be like in a positive way for these customers. Otherwise, they're going to figure it out for themselves, maybe make some assumptions. And the way that they see the world is really contingent on how complex and hard the project's going to be.
I agree with you. And if you can find out what that emotion is that drives that person to do something and start using kinesthetic words, how would you feel if those implication type of questions to get them focused on, what would happen after the audit if you didn't have this in line, or you were probably selling to CMOs. It's like, what happens when your competition, has this capability and you don't?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's some of the cases here where, for companies to be able to get to it first, and like what that means to them as an individual and their opportunities to get their bonus and get promoted and look good for their boss, or maybe they're not thinking about their professional lives, but they're thinking about their personal lives. Like, what's going to get me to the weekend in a calm way so I can get on a boat and go fishing?
Right. What's going to prevent people from giving the fire alarm on a Saturday night where you have to come in and fix something? Exactly. Hey, so this has been really interesting. What will people get out of the book?
Well, when I think about the transparency sale, I think about it more as a philosophy versus a methodology. It's just a different way to think. I believe that there's really three things that they're going to take away. Number one is this understanding that they need to start presenting their products and solutions as a 4.2 to a 4.5 instead of a 5.
Yeah.
And some of the techniques you can do to make sure that you know what people are saying about your company, your products, your services, and even what your employees are saying about your company. and start to cultivate that, and how marketing can then take that and turn it into messaging that salespeople can use, because salespeople, if left to their own devices, like I've said a couple of times, will maybe accidentally lead with, "This is why we're horrible," and like that's not the point. The second thing is to start to think about that concept of your buyers making decisions with feelings and backing it up with logic. And some of the techniques and some of the things to think about when you're sending a prospecting email, when you're positioning, when you're presenting, even when you're negotiating. And then I take it all the way to post-sale, the first communications after a sale, and how if you've got a client success organization, how do you deal with trouble? How do you deal with problems? And how do you make those customers want to advocate on your behalf and buy from you when they go join their next company, and then potentially buy more from you if you've got more to upsell them. And then that third piece is about the subconscious mind and how we make decisions, 90 to 95% of them subconsciously. And what are the things that we're doing to trigger subconscious decisions in a negative way during the process? So it's really, it's those three things I think are going to give readers a different perspective on how they've traditionally been taught. And they'll hopefully start seeing their future learnings and the way that they go about sales through a different light.
Excellent. And where do people get the book and connect with you?
Well, it is going to be out in the fall, but it is on pre-sale on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com and all of those places. It's called the Transparency Sale. They can check me out at ToddCapone.com, and I'm on Twitter at @TCapone.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Todd's a nice guy. I really enjoyed speaking with him. I put up with the bird. I'm sorry about that. I just didn't want to stop it, because once you get on a roll with somebody, that interrupt tends to break the pattern. Also, I booked the interviews pretty tight. So I hope you enjoyed that. Look for Todd's book when it comes out, because we live in a transparent world. And what really struck with me and what I got out of this is that we tend to think of ourselves as perfect. We tend to not want to take feedback or any kind of judgment. And some of it is because there's a difference between hate. Hate is just like, I'm not happy with myself, so I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you. Feedback is, I didn't understand this. Could you clarify that? And what it really struck me is that when I talk to salespeople, everybody wants knowledge. And knowledge is good. You got to know how to do something. But then you have to do it, take feedback, elicit feedback, look for feedback, do it again. Maybe you need more knowledge. Maybe you just need practice. And sales is something that we really need to take practice. I worked for managers before where they wouldn't even interview somebody who hasn't sold for 5 years. Their view was, I don't want to train anybody. For the same price, I can get somebody who's already trained. I don't have to babysit them. They go out on their own. Today, we're kind of doing just the opposite. Everybody's hiring people with no experience, giving them a bunch of automation, and they're burning out the market. And people, as soon as they have a modicum of success, they think they're an expert. And then they stop taking feedback. I think the most powerful thing you can do is admit that you're not perfect. Why? Because then you open up to the idea that you could improve. And this is a eureka moment. Instead of looking for the silver bullet, look for how I can improve. And yes, take knowledge, listen to knowledge, read knowledge, watch knowledge, listen to knowledge. Great. But also look at and examine your execution. How well are you writing your emails? Look at them. Have somebody else read them. Have me read them. Have anybody read them. And that's something that I've gotten out of the course, is that most people are not exposing themselves as far as what they're doing, because it's hard to help people by just telling them something, because what ends up happening is they do it, they don't get the result, and they blame the knowledge. The knowledge is good, and I always use the analogy of, think about the number of comic writers, comedian, what's the right word? writers for TV shows, for movies, for comedians. Now, there's millions of openings for that. And the jokes aren't the gold. It's the comedian who delivers the joke that's gold. It's not the person who makes the clothes. It's the model who wears the clothes that gets the thing done. It's not the ingredients of food. It's the chef that puts it together. We are the comedian, the chef, the model. We're all of that, and we've got to accept it and understand that there's different ways of doing it, that just having the right ingredients isn't going to make a great dish. We have to put it together, put it in front of somebody, take that feedback. Don't take it as hate. Don't take it as judgment. Don't take it as an insult. Take it as help. Now, we accept this in pretty much all of our lives. When we go to school, we get grades. Somebody looks at our homework. We go up to the board and people want to see your work. And math, they want to know how you got to the answer more than you got the answer right. Why? Because it's the logical process that you go through. The same is true with sales. If you're not getting the results that you want, you can blame the product, you can blame the market, the territory, and you're probably right, but you don't have control over it. The gold about accepting that you're not perfect is that you have control over you. Every word that you write, every action you take, every word you say, every smile that you make, every frown that you make, you have control over that. And why not start there, focus there, instead of searching, I'm going to read the 15th book on objection handling or prospecting. But that's what I want to get out of the office hours is the vulnerability of showing your work, sharing it with others, and getting feedback and not judge. Not one person in the course has ever hated. And the people who are getting the most out of it are the people who are being vulnerable or saying, like, here's my map to money. What do you think's going to happen? And I can help them there. And I go, I've never sold what you're doing, but you know what's going to happen here. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Or have you ever thought what's going to happen here? How do you prevent that? Sales is a prevention profession. It's not a repair profession. Okay, enough of my preaching. But I got on a rant about this on my morning walk today. And I was like, there's too much of people looking about what and not enough about how you actually do it. And everyone's like looking for the magic subject line, the magic opening, the brilliant insight, because everybody thinks that's what it is. And it may be, but if there's 100 people delivering or sending that subject line, they're going to get different results. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to blame the subject line. They're going to blame the insight. They're going to blame the question instead of owning it and saying, am I doing it at the right time with the right person in the right way? And owning that because that's what you have control over. You don't have control over the client. You have control over what you do with the client to engage them, to build rapport, develop interest, and to elicit action. Now, that is great selling. As soon as you have the attitude of, this is what I do, this is a better way. Okay, if it's a better way, do it. Are you getting better results? I'm not saying I have the best way. I don't. I have no idea what you sell or how you sell it. What I'm here to do is help you, not judge you. I could care less. I want you to make $1 million a year. If you don't want to, that's your business, none of mine. I don't care. I want to help. I don't want to judge. I certainly don't want to hate. I am grateful that you listen to me. I want to help. I want to connect with you on LinkedIn. I want to bring enough value to you that you feel comfortable sharing it with your friends, sharing it on social, liking it, commenting it, giving me feedback. Love all that. So really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes. Also, check out the partners. Discover.org's blog is really cooking. I'm really helping Pipedrive as well on their blog, trying to get the topics that I think you're interested in to get it to really resonate. I think the product's fantastic. Nudge is doing great work. Co-video. If you're not using co-video yet, video email is one of the things. And people say, oh, it doesn't work. Well, wait a second. It's working for me. It's working for these 1,000 people. It might be, and let's face it, I've been doing video, now 6-7 years on YouTube. And, I got a lot, and YouTube is brutal. You want feedback? You want hate? Put something up on YouTube. Everyone's comfortable hating on YouTube for some reason. Maybe this was the most anonymous. But what happens with video is you got to find a new way of connecting with people. And I think this is the year of video. It certainly is on LinkedIn. I'm cooking with video on LinkedIn. It's a great way to engage people. People see you. They get a sense of your life. They get a sense that you care, that you're not just blah, blah, blah. Want them to listen to your podcast or sign up for your course or whatever. But everything's available on b2brevenue.com. There's a free book on there that will show you how companies buy so that you can build your strategy on how to sell them. Check out the courses, see if they're a match for you. Here we are going into August. We still got probably 2 or 3 weeks where it's going to be slow. Now's the time to take it. I'm probably going to raise the price September 1st because you're going to have... 6 months? Oh, God. 12 additional hours that didn't exist in January of office hours, of people really sharing what's working today and what isn't. It's pure gold. I'm telling you, there's nothing better than listening to other salespeople talk about what's working. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.